We're live.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for listening in. If you're watching this video, we really appreciate you joining us. And my name is Tino and I'm with Steve Wilshire. And we continue our series on God's amazing creation. And this is lesson number 4. And lesson number 4 is God created the microbes. And this is just part 1. So we hope that you will watch part 2 because we're just introducing it today. And we'll drill a little bit deeper into it, into the world of the microbes next week. And so we're going to begin today by just kind of looking back of what we've covered so far. So we have covered 3 lessons already. Lesson number 1, we looked at how God put the theme of the Bible in the first word of the verse, Bereshit. And the theme is that the Son of the Father will die by his hands on the cross. And of course, we say that this is very likely referred to our Lord and Savior. And that's the theme of the Bible. And then we went to lesson number 2, and that is God created an awesome universe, the heavens. And he created the sun, the moon, and the stars. And it is so great that we cannot talk in terms of distance in miles, but we talk in terms of light years. Okay? And then lesson number 3, we covered how God created one of the small stars in the universe, the earth or the world, and he created the living things and everything in the world, and he also placed man in the world. And so the theme and the conclusion of each one of these lessons that we need to keep emphasizing is the following: that God created this for his glory. And we stated that glory is the public display of godly characters, divine attributes of God, that when we see this in God's creation, we think of God, because that's the purpose for creating all this for us. And so today, we're going to cover the world of the microbes, part 1. And so we're going to begin with Steve reviewing the days of creation for us. Steve?
All right. So the Genesis chapter 1 account of creation is an account of going from nothing to not only something, but something with great order and precision and a functioning entity, this cosmos that is created. In day 1, light was called into being, and the absence of light is darkness. And this was what God chose to do on day 1. But then day 2, he separated moisture, the waters that were below the firmament from the water that was above the firmament or in the sky. And so he created this firmament, and we find later that the firmament is going to be where the birds will spend a lot of their time flying. So we understand what that firmament is. Then on day 3, he creates the seas and dry land, and populates that dry land with plant. The plants are herbs, the plants are trees, grasses, and all living things of a plant variety are included here on day 3. And then interestingly, the next day, he creates the lights for the earth, but they also are in the sun and the moon and all of the stars. They also provide all of the constellations that we understand, all of the galaxies. We've discussed that in an earlier lesson. The the vastness of it and the precision of its movement and just this all of this part of the cosmos is created day 4. Then day 5, God turns again to the earth and he creates all of the creatures that live in water and that fly in the air. And it must have just been a magnificent day when all of this springs to life by God's design. These fabulous animals and sea creatures and all of the fish and the seas teeming with them and the rivers teeming with them. And then on day 6, he continues looking at the earth and he populates the earth with animals, and then he crowns his creation with the creation of man. And the text indicates that man is created in the image of God, male and female, he creates them. And so it remains to this day that we have male and female of all the animals and of man, and he has ordered that all creatures on the earth are to reproduce after their kind, the text says. And so, Tino, I'll turn it back over to you. And then God rested, of course, on the 7th day of creation.
All right. Well, Steve, thank you for that review. And let's discuss this one briefly, Steve. Anytime that we talk about creation, we talk about things that we can see with our naked eyes, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. We look into the heavens and we see the sun, the moon, and the stars, and we are very impressed and we are taken aback by them. And we think about the Creator. And then we go outside in the daytime and we see the sun and we see the trees and we see animals, and we are very impressed and we think about the power and the wisdom of God. And there's nothing wrong with that, right, Steve? We have to think about what we see with the naked eyes.
Oh, yes. It impresses us, and it's supposed to demonstrate to us the glory of God, Psalm 19, when we see these things.
Yes. And but in addition to that, and so this lesson right here that we're presenting, Steve, is that yes, it's good to think about things that we can see with the naked eyes, and it's great to think of how vast the creation of things that we can see. But there is an entire world that God created in this world, and I don't know how to put this, but it's the world of the unseen. And it is very impressive. It is very extensive. And we're going to demonstrate in the first lesson that it may even be more extensive than the seen world. And so I would like to begin with that. If you don't do you have anything to add to that, Steve, before we begin?
No, I'm looking forward to it. Go ahead.
Okay. So the world of the microbes, and we call this microcosmo. I don't know if it is an official scientific name, but we're going to call it the world of the tiny creatures. There are 5 groups that we often refer to. They're the viruses, they're the bacteria, and you can see right here, this is the SARS-CoV-2, the first picture, and that is the picture of the virus that causes the COVID-19. And then the next one is picture of E. coli, and this is a bacteria that represents the E. coli. The next one is archaea, and this is their picture. And then protists, represented by amoeba, that is shown in this picture. And the last one, you will be familiar with this, and these are yeast that we need when we bake, right? And this represents the group, the fifth group, the fungi, or sometimes we call it fungi, depending on who's pronouncing it. And so we have these 5 groups. But I want you to realize that within each group, there are so many subgroups and there are so many types of organisms. It's an extensive microcosmal world, okay? And so just to demonstrate that, I'm going to take one of these groups, and that is the viruses. Now, viruses infect every living thing on the face of the earth. They infect the plants, every plant. They infect every animal. They infect the birds that fly around. They infect bacteria. They infect the fish. They infect all microorganisms, right? And so these are viruses that infect every living thing on the face of the earth. And how about people? Well, Steve, believe it or not, we breathe, and we breathe in and we breathe out on a daily basis, billions and billions of viruses. We live in a cloud of viruses. When we shake people's hand, we're transferring microorganisms. When we're coughing viruses. When we eat vegetables, right? We go to the farmer's market and we have bell peppers and we have those cabbage and so forth. Those are infected with viruses. Now, I don't want to alarm anybody. Most of these don't do any damage to us. They just go into our body and they get passed out. In fact, we're going to show how important they are. So they infect every living on the face of the earth. Now, let's take just one type of virus. Remember, there are many, many types of viruses. And so that one group, out of that one group, we're going to take just one type. And the viruses that infect bacteria. The number is non-alien viruses. That is 1 followed by 30 zeros. That's a great number right there, right? Now, let me kind of paint that for you and in a way that you might appreciate it. We stated that do our best estimate, and we may be underestimating it. There are 200 followed by 21 zeros stars in the universe. This number is called 200 sextillion stars in the universe. Now, if you were to combine the viruses that infect bacteria alone and compare it with the numbers of stars that are in the universe, you can put 5 million bacteria infecting viruses on each star in the universe. That's a lot of viruses, right? Remember, not all viruses. These are just the viruses that infect bacteria, not on land, not in the trees, not on lands, not in the air, but only in the oceans. And this is how many. When we go and swim in the ocean and we have salt water in our mouth, we've got billions of viruses, right? In 1 liter of salt water, you have more bacteria infected viruses than you have people on the face of the earth, which I believe we're over 7 billion people. So in that 1 liter, you have over 7 billion viruses in there. So this is just one type of one virus, which makes up one of the 5 groups. That's extensive. All right. Now, the viruses they weigh femtogram. That is tiny, tiny, tiny amount. Now, please remember that there are 454 grams per pound. If we were to just determine the weight of the bacteria infecting viruses in the oceans that we have, the weight of all the viruses in the oceans that we have is about 1.1 billion tons. These are viruses we don't see, Steve. These are viruses we don't feel unless they do damage, right? They cause disease. And yet they weigh about 1.1 billion tons, just the bacteria-specific viruses in the oceans. Let me paint it, the picture in a way that you can really appreciate it. The pyramid that is shown on your right in that picture is the pyramid of Khufu. And it is estimated that pyramid weighs about 12 billion tons. That is that the weight of all the viruses that infect bacteria in the ocean, in the seawaters, is a tenth of that, the weight of that pyramid. That is impressive, isn't it? And so when we cover, Steve, when we cover the heavens and the earth, and we cover the universe, we were very taken aback by the size of the universe, right? And yet, on the face of the earth, in just the water, boy, you've got this one type of virus that is very abundant. And you're blown away when you look at it. You see the number and you see the weight. Well, that's not all. Let's look at it this way, Steve. Each one of those has an average size of 200 nanometer. That is a billion, 200 billionth of a meter, right? Now, if you were to take all the viruses that infect bacteria in just the ocean water, Steve, if we were to line them up head to tail, I don't know why we would do that, but it's a good comparison. It's a good way of looking at it, right? We line each one of those head to tail, and since it's going to be a long distance, we're going to aim it into space. It's going to reach 20 million light years from the Earth. You remember light years? 1 light year is a year that it takes the light to travel for 1 year, which is 5.9 trillion miles. Now, my mind is blown when I look at 20 million light years and I try to figure that out in the number of miles. It's incredible. And we would, if we were to follow that out, we would end up on the galaxy called Messier 106. They call it M106, which is located from 20 to 22 million light years from the Earth. Very extensive. Remember, I need to keep bringing you back to this. We're just looking at one of the 5 groups of microbes and one specific type within the group of viruses. Just the ones, just the viruses that infect bacteria. And not all over the face of the earth, but just in the salt water, in the ocean. Wow, 20 million light years into space, okay? So let's ask the following question, Steve, and we can go ahead and discuss this. When were they created? We are not told when they were created, were we, Steve?
Not specifically, but they must have some role in support of the cosmos, of the universe. And so you would think that those in the ocean were created when the oceans were created, or those in plants were created when the plants were created in order to support life.
I like that. I like that logic, Steve. Sorry. I like that. Because as we say, they infect every living thing. And there's a reason for that. And we're going to go into some of the reason. And Steve, I think you hit it right, the nail on the head. We are not told specifically, but we are told when things were created, living things were created. As Steve pointed out, the seas were created on day 3, right? it would be logical to think that, yes, viruses that belong in the ocean were created at the same time, because they will infect bacteria in the ocean and they will infect fish, right? Lands, in the soil, we have a lot of bacteria infecting viruses, and you would think that they will be created when the lands were created. Plants, we have virus that infect plants, and they would be created at the same time. That's God's design. That is grand design. And I like the way that you reason that out, Steve. Yeah, I believe that viruses were created specifically where they belong on day 3, day 5, and day 6. And I think that's a very good logical reasoning. So we can surmise that they were created with the living things on days 3, 5, and 6. Now, we want to keep these lessons rather short, so we're going to wrap it up with the following, okay? And the question is, and I'll say a few words, and Steve, you can do that. Say a few words after me, and that is the question that we want to answer, because this is the purpose of this series of lessons. Why were they created? Well, we need to go back to the beginning, Steve, right? They were created for His glory. They were created to show publicly divine or godly characters, to point people to Him. And I can't wait for lesson number 2, because we'll get into it a little bit deeper, right? So number 1, they were created for His glory. Number 2, well, they're part of God's creation. They're critical for survival of living things in the world. I'll give you an example. There is a grass that grows in the Yellowstone hot springs. The temperature for the hot springs will go up to 65 degrees Celsius. That is 149 degrees Fahrenheit. This grass will grow. It thrives in that temperature. It's called Trichanthidium lanuginosum. That's the name of the grass. Now, it turns out that if you were to purify an environment and try to cultivate that grass, let's say that you have an aseptic environment in the lab, and you give it the light it needs, and you give it the temperature that it needs, Steve, that grass is not going to grow, because that grass needs a fungus called Corvallaria pertuberate. That fungus is necessary to infect that grass in order for that grass to grow. But if you just add that fungus and that fungus only, that grass is not going to grow. And why not? Because that fungus needs a virus to infect that fungus. So, Steve, let's paint the following picture. A virus needs to infect a fungus, and fungus needs to infect a grass in order to make the grass grow healthy, green, and thrive in very hot weather, 149 degrees Fahrenheit. Isn't that impressive design? That's the intelligent design of the Creator. That's why these are necessary. Yeah, the virus is necessary, the fungus is necessary in order for that grass to grow. And that's just a very simple example.
Are there any viruses that we have to have in our bodies in order to be able to survive?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. That's number 5. We'll jump to number 5, Steve. That's an example. We have heard of the microbiome in our GI system, right? In our intestine. And that's very important. We realize that in order for our immune system to develop, we need those bacteria. We need that microbiome. In order for our immune system to develop, we need that microbiome. And so Steve, we cannot do experiments on humans, right? Yeah, we cannot just kind of take out the bacteria and take out the viruses from human internal organs, right? And grow them in very aseptic or sterile environment. Yeah, that's we can't do that. But they've done that for animals, for rats, and for mice. And they found out, Steve, that if you were to grow this animal in very sterile environment, their immune system will not develop properly.
Hmm.
Their GI system, digestive tract, will not develop. Because the digestive tract development needs the immune system, and the immune system is not going to be developed if you don't have the microbes in there that consists of bacteria and viruses. We never knew what the functions were, Steve, but as we get smarter and smarter in science, which is nothing compared to the creator that designed all this, we begin to understand more and more that these are very critical for our survival. And yes, in short, the answer to your question is without these viruses, yeah, but it turns out that there may be a virome, and we call it virome, a class of viruses that are specifically for the heart, and they're necessary for the heart to develop, for the GI tract to develop, for the immune system. And so it appears that these viruses are necessary for our bodies to develop. And let me just throw this out too. There is a protein, and we're going to talk about DNA. We'll get into all this in later lessons. But it turns out that everybody is infected with viruses. Steve, we began our infection in utero, in the womb. And once you get infected with some of these viruses, they never go away. But your immune system will keep them under wrap. Yeah, they will keep them in check. And it turns out that we have adopted some of these viral genes into our genetics. And some of these proteins are very critical for our survivals. I'll give you an example. There is one protein that is critical for the development of the placenta. And we get that protein from viral DNA that's been inserted as part of our genetics. And so, yes, they're very necessary for our survival. Let me go back to 3. There's one virus per bacterium on the face of the earth. In other words, E. coli might be infected by one type of virus. Other bacteria might be infected with different types of virus. In this country, Steve, we're having problem with antibiotic resistance bacteria, right? That's because we're overusing antibiotics to treat our bacteria. Well, the Soviet Union is not having the same problem. And here's the reason why. They figured out a long time ago how there are viruses that will infect bacteria and kill bacteria. And then once the bacteria disappear, then the virus just kind of hang around. They don't do anything. They don't do any damage. Instead of using antibiotics, the Soviet Union has been using viruses. So they look at an infection that a person might have. They determine what the bacterial infection is, and they harvest the virus that is specific for that bacteria. They put it inside the body, and that virus seeks out the bacteria, infects the bacteria, kills the bacteria, and the virus goes out of your body. Doesn't do any harm. That's what the Soviet Union has been doing. And so they don't have any problem with bacteria, antibiotic resistant bacteria. And the final one that I want to point out is that my students are actually working in this area. There are viruses that will infect cancer cells and actually thrive on living on cancer cells. And once they infect the cancer cells, they're gone. Yeah, they won't infect normal cells. They only go in, they infect the cancer cells, and they're gone. specific types of cancer will be infected with specific types of viruses. And so this is what some of my students are really working on, and they're putting together a paper. And the idea is, why don't we harness the power of nature in viruses and use them to treat bacterial infection? It's natural. And to treat the cancers that we have. Well, that would be wonderful. We use the virus, they go into our bodies, they do their job, and then once the cells are gone, they move out. They don't do any harm. So what does all this mean, Steve? We're going to go back as we close, right? So even though we are talking about microbes that we cannot see with our naked eyes, most of them we cannot with our naked eyes, what is the bottom line of this introductory lesson on the world of the microbes? Well, I'll name one, and Steve, you can chime in if you want. And that is just looking at the extensive design. And we haven't looked at anything yet. We haven't broken up a virus and look at how all the machineries that goes on within the virus to help it to survive. And we're going to do that in later lessons. But when you look at the extensive world of the microbes, and when you look at the design that was put behind it, and when you look at the critical roles that they play in survival of living things on the face of the earth, I don't know about you folks, but I think about two things. I think about power of the Creator, and I think about the wisdom of the Creator. Can we add something else to that, Steve, as we close this lesson? I think about power and the wisdom. What else can we add to that?
I don't know of anything.
Well, providence, right? The love that he has for his creation, right? Especially man. And so, folks, the idea is he created all this for his glory, so that when we begin to learn and we understand it even more, as a scientist, I have to tell you this, every single day, my faith gets stronger and stronger in the Creator. Because the more that I learn about this, the more that I realize that they can't be by accident. They're not by accident. There is an intelligent design that was behind all this. And he sustains his creation with the power of his word. And so with that, Steve, thank you. And we want to thank all of you for listening. And we hope that you will listen to lesson number 5, which comes up next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you.